This video is all about using for loops. Let's get on with it. A for loop is an example of what's known as definite iteration. Now that basically means that when you run a for loop, you can always say for definite how many times it will loop. For loops are particularly useful for either repeating a sequence of code a certain number of times, or for looping through all of the characters of a string or all of the items in a list. I'm going to start just by storing some data to use in my examples. Let's have the string computer stored in Word, and let's have a list of colors. Now let's look at the most basic example of a for loop. Let's say that we want to print that word computer 5 times. So a for loop looks like this. For I in range, 2 brackets, and then a colon. And now in these brackets, inside this range function part of the for loop, this is where you can put how many times you want it to loop. So I'm going to put 5. I'm going to hit return after the colon. Notice how I'm now indented. That means that I'm inside the for loop and any code that I type will be repeated. If you find that you're not indented, it probably means that you forgot to put the colon. Hit return, I'm no longer indented, and if I tried to run this, it would give me an error. So make sure that you put that colon and that you are indented, and I'm just going to put print word. There we go, it prints computer 5 times. Now you might be asking yourself, what is that I bit all about? I is a special variable that you create within the for loop, which is a counting variable. You can think of the I as being short for incrementer or iterator. It's a variable that goes up each time it loops. Now if I remove word from there and put I, now we can actually see the value of I for each iteration. And you can see that it prints 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So clearly, I starts at 0, on the second loop it goes up to 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. Later in the video, we'll look at how that I variable can be used, but for now I just wanted you to understand what it is, and the fact that it goes up each time it loops. So we've talked about how you can use a for loop to repeat your code a certain number of times. Let's look at another type of for loop that allows you to traverse or loop through a string or a list. Now this type of loop is really straightforward. We can simply say for, and then let's loop through the string to start with. So I'm going to say for letter in Word, colon, next line, print letter. Now this variable letter, I've created this myself. I could give that any name that I want. I could put for x in Word, print x. Going to run it and you'll see that it prints each thing in Word. It prints C and then O and then M. Now there's nothing wrong with just putting X, but it is more helpful if you actually use a variable name that represents each of the things in Word. So in this case, it's a string made of letters, so I've put for letter in Word, print letter. Let's have a look at traversing the list. So I'm going to say for, now I'm looking at that list, what are the things in that list? Each one is a color. So I'm going to say for color in the list colors, colon, print color. And when I run it, it first does computer, but then you can see it loops through each of the items in the list. Now here's a common mistake that I see students do. If I put colors in there, this now means for every color in the list, print the whole list. So there are 7 colors in that list. So basically this is just going to print the entire list 7 times. So just something to be aware of. Now let's go back to using the for I in range loop, and we'll look at how you can do traversal using that kind of loop instead. I'm going to say for I in range, bracket, bracket, colon, and the word computer has got 8 letters, so I'm going to put 8 inside the range function. I'm now going to put print, the name of the variable, and now in square brackets, if you watch my video on strings and lists, I talk about indices, I talk about indexing, the fact that you can put an integer in these square brackets to specify a particular position in that string. So word 0, that's the first character in the string, C. Or I can put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And actually this is what I need this loop to be doing. I want it to print the first character, and then the second, third, fourth, fifth. And if you remember, that is exactly what the I variable does. It goes up each time. So in fact, I can put word I, and when I run this, you can see that this does exactly the same thing as using for letter in word. Now this might look like a more complicated way of looping through all of those characters, but let's have a look at why this might be useful. Let's use the same technique to loop through the list. So I'm going to say for I in range. Now this time, instead of putting 7, because there are 7 items in that list, I'm actually going to put len, which means measure the length of something, colors. So that way, it will simply loop through as many times as it needs to get through the whole list. It will measure the list. There's 7 in there. It's going to be range 7. Okay, so now let's go ahead and print the name of the variable, square brackets, I. So we're now traversing that list and printing each item individually. Now let's say that we wanted to print those colors as a numbered list. Well, the print statement can actually accept multiple things to be printed. At the moment, it's just got colors I, but I'm going to go in front of that and put I, comma. So now, on each line, it's going to print I, followed by colors I. Run it now, and you can see we've got a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'd quite like my numbered list to start at 1 instead. So in here, instead of just I, I'm going to put I plus 1. There is one more thing that I want to talk about in this video. Let's go ahead and delete all of that, and we'll just clear the console. So I want to talk about the range part of the range loop in a bit more detail. And I'm just going to print I for these examples. So far we've looked at what happens when you put in a single integer. For I in range 10, run it, and it repeats 10 times. But technically, that number doesn't actually mean repeat 10 times. When you put a single value into range, that single value is actually the stop before number. It means keep going, but stop before 10. You can also put a start number in here. So if I go in front of the 10 and put 5, comma, that now means loop, starting at 5 and stopping before 10. So it outputs 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's try another one. Let's make it start at 10 and stop before 100. That means it will go to 99. And we can see that it goes from 10 all the way to 99. You can also put in a third value. Now the third value is the step value. By default, it's 1. Each time it loops, I goes up by 1. But you can change that. I could make it go up in tens. Let's make this stop before 101. So now it's going to go from 10 up to 100, but it's going to go up by 10 every time. And when I run it, you can see it goes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, etc. So that range loop can actually accept 3 values. The start value, the stop before value, and the step. And there you go. That's how you can use for loops to repeat your code and to loop through strings and lists.